practice what you preach. Kind of a saying that's been used all the time. Some in response to people who are trying to tell you some things. Maybe you sense that they're not being totally honest with you. Maybe someone has said that to you. They've caught you out, some of the things that you're saying or doing or living, and someone says, hey, practice what you preach. It's a saying so common in our society, but believe it or not, it actually does come from the Bible, which I guess you might expect. It talks about preaching, and that's really where you'll find it in the Bible, but this idea really comes from Scripture. You see, there's a place in the Bible, in Romans chapter 2, starting in verse 17, it says, indeed, you are called a Jew and rest in the law and make your boast in God and know his will and approve the things that are excellent, being instructed out of the law. Just setting up the context for this text about preaching, practicing what you preach. And so watch here in verse 19, and are confident that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, and a teacher of babes, having the form of knowledge and truth in the law. You, therefore, who teach another, do you not teach yourself? So, you're teaching all these people. Are you actually teaching yourself? You who preach, here, watch this, that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say, do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who make your boast in the law, do you dishonor God through breaking the law? Here's this practice what you preach type of idea. And man, if you're on the receiving end of someone telling you or preaching to you of what you should or shouldn't do, or warning you against things, maybe even telling you literally what to do, not even just advice, maybe going a step further, how does that all feel coming from someone? You see, it's different when you're in kind of a mentoring relationship, or it's someone you respect or you admire, or you even ask them for help in some ways. But if someone just comes up and starts telling you what to do, maybe even unsolicited, that doesn't always feel so great, does it? And so firstly, we should be cognizant of that, and we should not do that to other people. We should not be telling people to do things unsolicited already from that way. We should not be going about our lives seeking to tell other people what to do, just in everyday, ordinary life. That's not necessarily what we should be seeking out to do, because even teachers, even instructors, even guides of different parts of life and in career and work, they have a setting where that is appropriate and where it's expected and set upon. But very rarely do I find that people who set out to go teaching everyone everything about life and how to do everything so great, these gurus, I often find if you peel a little bit of a layer back, especially those you might find on social media or here on YouTube or anywhere, who just have it all figured out, I find that usually is not necessarily the case when you peel back the layers and see the authenticity of their life. It may not be as picture perfect as it may seem. And sure do we see that often through pop culture and society, and those we put on pedestals and those we look up to. We find in a little bit we have these so-called skeletons in closets. And so with that, we should be wary of telling other people what to do, especially unsolicited. But guess what? What if it is appropriate? What if there are some things that should be said? Well, then we get into this issue of practice what you preach. If you are going to say to someone something to do, maybe an idea, maybe how to do something, you better have experience in that way. Years ago, I asked someone about a situation, or maybe I was even just telling them about it. I was just informing them about what I was going through, and I didn't really ask for help from it, but I was just sharing what I was going through. It was an opportunity to just let them know what was going on in my life and in my work at the time. And shortly after that, they had said, well, you should do this. That would be great. I think you should do that. I said, oh, really? Why? Well, why do you think so? Have you done that yourself? And they went, oh, well, no, I haven't, but, I think that's what would be good for you. It's like, wait, so then why would you tell me what to do if you haven't really experienced it yourself? I didn't ask for the advice. I didn't really say, hey, do you know what, could you help me out in this way? Can you help me with ideas? Can you spitball with me? But It's tough when someone's telling me to do something that they don't have any experience in themselves or they aren't already doing in their own life. That's not very helpful. When you go to, say, a seminar or for help, or, what's really big right now, financial seminars. You want to go hear from people, hey, here's how you can manage your money better. Here's how you can be more steward, like you can steward your finances and your life and your family much better. You don't want to get that from someone who is not in control of any of those things. You want people who are actually succeeding in these areas. Same with anything in life, those we go to for help or assistance or that we want guidance from. It's from people who've been around the block, AKA they practice what they preach. But far too often do we find ourselves giving in to the temptation of do as I say, not as I do. And man, is that so tempting, but does it really help in the end? For those of you that are parents, that will be the bane of your parenting in some ways, when your children call you out for things that possibly you are doing yourself. You ask them not to do something, yet you also do it yourself. Rules for thee, not for me. Does that sound familiar? And so we need to be careful about what we hold to other people without holding to ourselves. Because if we don't, that lends itself to hypocrisy. And boy, does the Bible have an awful lot to say about that. And this stems all the way back to Jesus himself. In Matthew chapter 22 and 23, Jesus is sharing a message here. And he goes into chapter 23 of Matthew. He's speaking to the scribes and Pharisees and religious elect and leaders at the time. And you see, they had an issue at that time too, of doing as I say, not as I do. Holding rules and expectations to the Jewish people, religiously, like in society and the way that you do your life as well, beyond just religious law, and holding the society and the people to it. Yet, were they really holding themselves to that as well? Well, let's see what Jesus has to say. Matthew chapter 23, starting in verse 1, just these first 3 verses, it says this. Then Jesus spoke to the multitudes and his disciples, saying this, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, and speaking of Moses' seat, talking about of authority, because Moses used to be kind of the leader of the Jewish people way back in the Bible. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe as leaders, as officers, as the heads of this thing, that observe and do. So therefore, whatever you tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. So when you're considering what to do in your life, they're going to tell you a lot of things of what you're supposed to do, which they were at the time. However, do not look at what they're doing, because what they say they do not do. They don't do according to their works. Don't do according to their works, for they say and do not do. And this is Jesus speaking of hypocrisy. And he would continue to call out different groups of people for doing this. The last thing I want to be is a hypocrite. I would never want to be called a hypocrite. No one wants to be that. I mean, do you? Don't want to be called a hypocrite. And I also don't want to deal with people who are hypocrites, who hold me to things and judge me for things, yet they themselves also have things going on. Maybe even in the same way that I do. It's just easier to point mine out than themselves. And so that's another thing that we should look out for in our own lives, to not be hypocritical. This is where it comes from. This having two faces, maybe not even lying about things, but being inauthentic or ingenuine with people, of expecting things of people that we don't expect of ourselves. And no one likes that, just from a relational perspective, let alone that Jesus advises against it. And this goes into all facets of our life, even just to lifestyle and society and health and finances, and also in practice of religion, of Christianity, of leaders and people who are expecting things of you and placing these things on you. Yet, do they do them themselves? Do they model that for you? Have they shown you ways that you can grow in that and actually do that, live that out authentically? If not, then we have some more work to do, because we don't want to be hypocritical. We want to actually do as we say, not just saying and expecting people to do, lest we be hypocritical. I want to take you back to that text in Romans 2, because the tail end of that goes even just a little bit further of the outcome of what can happen if we fall into these traps. Romans chapter 2, beginning in verse 24. This is right after that same text I started with. Watch what it says here. It says, when it talks about those who preach, do you preach to yourself? Those who teach, do you teach to yourself? Those who say not to steal, do you steal? Those who desecrate, who abhor idols, do you do that yourself? All this to say, here's that kicker, that final sentence, kind of a punch at the end is, for the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, as it is written. So this is a really deep issue. This is saying that due to your hypocrisy, for them as Jews, the way they are living this out and demonstrating it for Gentiles or the non-believers at the time in the Bible, God is actually being dishonored by the way in which you are exhibiting your religious experience. So let's jump this to today's context. For us as Christians, the way that we live out Christianity actually does have an impact on those who are non-Christians, those who are non-believers. It has a profound impact. And in fact, it could be so far as to say, just like what Paul is speaking to the people here in Romans about, is that the way that we live out our Christianity today could have a negative impact on people who are not believers or don't consider themselves Christians, because when those who claim to be Christian behave in un-Christ-like ways or unlike ways that the Bible tells us to, or unlike Jesus, it dishonors God. And it goes even further to say that for us, that means non-believers are going to judge God and judge Christianity, all of these things, by the way that we act, by the way that we exhibit our faith in our life. And so we need to be very clear with these things, that if we are claiming something, that we are saying something, that we're actually doing it. Because we all want to see, we have people in our lives. We want more people to come into a loving and saving relationship with Jesus, right? I mean, that's the end goal. We want to follow him. We want to live for him so that we can spend eternity with him in heaven. That's the end goal. And we want as many people as possible to come unto Christ. And so our witness and the ways that we interact with everyone else on this planet actually matters in a significant way. That we're not hypocritical. That we don't just speak of things and telling the world to do things, yet we're not living it out. And this goes much further into actually just doing as Christ has said. And so when we go out and claim that we're Christians, or we say that we're Christians, or we get the label that we are Christians, yet we don't actually back it up by living out things of this Bible, that we don't resemble Christ. And some say, oh, well, that's too big of a task. Yeah, not to be Christ, but to be as Christ, to be like Christ. We are called to be Christ-like. That's the whole concept of being a disciple. It means to be like him. And we can certainly come closer and closer to being like Christ if we pay attention to lessons, maybe just like this one, about hypocrisy, about doing as we say, about following through on what the Bible actually says, not just being Christian just by the title or the name only, but actually living it out so that our friends, our family, people in our community, people in the world who are listening, who are watching, they're watching Christians to see if they actually live up and live out and live the experiences and the expectations of God here in the Bible. And when those things don't match up, like Paul says here in Romans, it actually serves to blaspheme or dishonor God. And friends, I don't want to dishonor God. I want to honor God. I want to glorify him. And I'm sure you do too. And so this is a call for us. This is a challenge for us to live as authentically as possible of who we are, of who God has designed us to be, but also living up to the call of what Jesus has expected of his people, which is to do as he says. And holding people to things, we're only holding people to what God has expected here, those who have chosen to follow him. And we should do as Christ has said. We should actually live out the things that we say and put out into the world. People are watching. People are expecting people who are Christians to be like Christ. And so that's my prayer for you this morning, to be like Christ if you are a Christian in all ways. And with that, I think we'll see many great things to happen, and many more will come to know Christ in a loving and saving way. God bless.